So I don't have many profound or original thoughts. I wish I did, but I don't. And I've found that I've had to be content with reading what others have to say. And so in preparation for tonight's little discussion, I used 3 good books that I highly recommend to you as reference material and as reading material, and from which I have freely plagiarized. So the first good book, of course, is the Bible, and there's some good things to be said in there about prayer. And the verse about praying continually, I have found out, is because there's so much we need to pray about. And whether it's praying for Jerusalem or praying for Israel or what? Hold it closer. Oh, there we go. Hello. So the other 2 books that I have plagiarized from, and I've mentioned this before, is called The Prayer of Jabez. And the third book is called The Furious Longing of God by Brennan Manning. So I'll be reading some excerpts out of those as we go along. But first, a little brief anecdote. When I was growing up, we had a relatively new young pastor at the church I attended, and he was faced with a bit of a problem when he first showed up at the church. His very first service at this new parish, or for him was a new parish, was to preach the funeral service for the previous pastor, who was much loved in the community. This rural 3-church parish had, over the previous 75 or so years, had only 2 pastors, a father and a son combination that had served the parish well for 30 plus and 40 plus years respectively. The family name, if it wasn't legendary, was at least well storied within the denomination's seminary and the college rosters, past and present. So as a young preacher, what do you say at a funeral such as that? His opening remarks, as he looked down at the front pew and seeing that it was holding several seminary and college professors bearing the family name, was actually quite simple. He started by saying, "We are here today to remember a sinner." And his various heads jerked up, and after a pregnant pause, he clarified and said, "A sinner saved by grace." Well, I can now kind of relate to that situation, because after a couple of months of testimonials and excellent speakers here on Wednesday nights on the topic of prayer, we've now reached the dregs of the speaker barrel. But fortunately, I'm a speaker saved by grace. The wondrous grace of God Almighty. A grace that I'm confident you will see, that will see me through tonight's presentation, and a grace that will hopefully allow you to suffer through it as you have to listen to me for the next few minutes. So please bear with me, and this too shall pass. Someone once said that there is really little difference between people, but that little difference can make a great deal of difference. I believe Jabez was one such person. You have heard me mention that name before from the podium here, but if we are going to discuss prayer, I think that the Jabez story repeats bearing, and it's found in 1 Chronicles 4:8. So as you go through Chronicles, it goes on page after page of so-and-so's son was so-and-so, and his son, and his son, and his son, and it just lists one name after another. But when you get to chapter 4, verse 9, the writer takes a little digression. And he says, Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, I gave birth to him in pain. Jabez cried out to the Lord, the God of Israel, Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from evil, so that I will not cause pain to others. And God granted his request. I like that. It's a simple prayer. It's straightforward. That you would bless me, enlarge my territory, let your hand be with me, and keep me from harm. Some people might think it's strange to pray and just focus on God bless me, God bless me. But Jabez didn't think so. I think God likes short, simple prayers. Prayers like, God help me. Pretty well sums it up. Short phrase. It's a type of prayer he can do something with. It doesn't tell him how he's supposed to help us. It doesn't tell him how to do it. It just says, God help me. We hear some of these days about Gabbit and Grabbit TV evangelists and, do this and do that, and you get blessings and so forth. And that message is received with mixed feelings, and I don't think Jabez was one of those. I think Jabez's prayer cuts two ways. Yes, he asked that God bless him. In fact, he said, bless me indeed. When you use the word indeed, you're no longer just saying, excuse me for sneezing. Indeed. I mean, it's a cry from the heart. I'm serious about this, God. Bless me. And it has to do with motivations. What do you want to do with those blessings? I believe Jabez was motivated to ask in his prayer to be blessed so that he in turn could bless others. How can you bless others if your basket is empty? Same for expanding one's borders. It's not just seeking more farmland. It's also asking God to expand your areas of influence for greater service to him. One person at a time, one divine encounter at a time. John and Sandy, I know when you guys were down in Mexico, I think it was a while back, and talking of divine appointments and whatever, but I think you all got involved with a discussion with the taxi driver, and you determined that it was really a divine appointment, and it led to sharing the salvation story with a taxi cab driver. So I think that's what Jabez is talking about when he says, expand my territories, expand my area of influence. Again, it's another reason why I like this prayer of Jabez. And let's face it, life probably started poorly for Jabez. Hey there, Mr. Pain Causer. How did your first day at school go? I cannot imagine that he did not take some commentary from fellow students or fellow playmates and whatever else. But later on in life, he said a simple prayer, and in the end, things finished well for him. God answered his prayer. And I think that's the way a prayer should work. When I pray the Lord's Prayer, I try to pray it rather slowly. I take it each word at a time, or at least one line at a time, and then meditate on it a little bit before going to the next one. When I get to the line that says, "Give us our daily bread," I'm not thinking just about food. Jesus is our bread, even more so than potatoes. So I have no qualms about asking for lots of bread. Lord, bless me, that I might not cause pain to other people. Bless me, fill me, that I may be a blessing to others. So I believe that praying with a proper motive has much to do with how God responds to our petitions. An example of an effectual fervent prayer is when the author of the book challenged some college kids to think big. And that's kind of the primary theme, I think, of my talk tonight, is thinking big. But he challenged them to ask for the Pacific Ocean island of Trinidad and ask for a DC-10 to take them there. A couple of the students took them seriously, and God made it happen. Within a year, their ministry team was on the island, arriving in a DC-10, and their ministry went a good distance towards bringing the gospel to that entire island. So use prayer to expand your boundaries. This little book shares a lot more than what I've just mentioned here, and I encourage you, it's available at the local bookstore over in Maple Grove, Lifeway, I think it is. They usually keep 1 or 2 copies on the shelf. I've gone in there and I think I've purchased about a half a dozen of them over the years, and they make good giveaways. The next book that I plagiarized from is called The Furious Longing of God. And it has a little bit, I think, to do with what is your picture of God when you pray? Are you praying to Santa Claus? Lord, gimme, gimme, gimme? Are you praying to a tyrant, striking the mountain with lightning or whatever? Or are you praying to a friend? So I think how you envision the person you are praying to has much to do with what you pray for and how you go about it. I'm going to read a few pages from this. They're short pages, so hopefully it won't take too long. Let's see here. I like the way the book starts. It starts out by saying, "I am Brennan. I am an alcoholic. How I got there, why I left there, why I went back is the story of my life. But it's not the whole story. I am Brennan, Catholic. How I got there, why I left there, why I went back is also the story of my life, but it's not the whole story. I am Brennan. I was a priest, but I am no longer a priest. I was a married man, but I'm no longer a married man. How I got to those places, why I left those places is the story of my life too, but it is not the whole story. I am Brennan. I'm a sinner, saved by grace. This is the larger and more important story. Only God in his fury knows the whole of it." And the book goes on to explain a little further what he means about the fury of God and the fury of God's love toward us. He does a quick little story about when he lived in Bayou La Batre, Alabama. He went to work on a shrimp boat occasionally, and one time caught in a storm. They were in a 45-foot long boat, and suddenly the clouds gathered and the temperatures dropped, the sea began to churn, and soon they had 120-mile-an-hour winds. And he was convinced he was going to die, and the swells were 10, 15 feet high. It was a fury unleashed. And if his comment was, if a man would learn to pray, let him go to sea. There's a lot of truth in that the sea can be your friend or the sea can be very violent. But he says, my life has been a life lived in God's furious longing, and I have learned to pray. So we can learn to pray from our trials. We can learn to pray from our high points when we're far from our trials. So again, going on, what is the picture of God when you are praying? I liked what he had to say in that he says, Genesis of this book originated in 1978 during a 30-day silent, directed retreat at a spiritual center. His director was a Jesuit priest and guided him to a passage in the Song of Solomon. I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. That was the passage they prayed and meditated on for a week. I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. And I think when you can approach God with that kind of a mindset, then it's going to be a lot easier to carry on a dialogue with him. And when you understand that his desire for you can best be described as a furious longing, it's something he's passionate about. And as you approach God, viewing him in that kind of a mindset, the drum beats of doom in your head will be replaced by a song in your heart, which can lead to a twinkle in your eye. You will not be dependent on the company of others to ease your loneliness, for God is with you. On an inside, you will move from I should pray to I must pray. You will live with an awareness that the Father not only loves you, but he likes you. You will stop comparing yourself to others. Off and on throughout the day, you will just know that you are being seen by Jesus with a gaze of infinite tenderness. There's no need to mince words. I believe that Christianity happens when men and women experience the reckless, raging confidence that comes from knowing the God of Jesus Christ. And I think we sang a song last Sunday with those kind of words, didn't we, Eric? When we experience the reckless, raging confidence that comes from knowing a God that loves you. The furious longing of God is beyond our wildest dreams, our hope or hopelessness. It's beyond our rectitude or wickedness. The furious longing of God is not to be reduced to a thing of a grand ideal or a plaything or a caged songbird for the amusement of children. It cannot be tamed. It cannot be boxed or captivated, housebroken or temple broken. It is simply and startlingly Jesus and his reflection of the Father's love. So when we can approach God with the idea that, come then, my lovely one, come. For see, winter is past, the rains are over and gone, flowers are appearing on the earth, the seasons of glad song has come, the cooing of the turtle dove is heard over the land, the fig tree is forming its first figs, and its blossoming vines give off their fragrance. Come then, my beloved one, come. And I think when we approach God with that kind of a mindset, the dialogue gets to be a lot easier. So what is your attitude when praying? What does it mean to approach something with an attitude of prayer? And at one time, I just kind of imagine when you approach something with an attitude of prayer, you're kind of tiptoeing or whatever. But I think timidity does not fare nearly as well as a spirit of boldness if one is fully to abide in this reckless, passionate, furious love of God. The Bible is replete with references of people coming boldly into the presence of God. Indeed, we're instructed to do so. In this book, I want to read a couple of more examples because it talks about boldness when you're talking to God. If you go to the Oxford English Dictionary, it has a word in there, a Yiddish word. It has several Yiddish words, but one Yiddish word that is significant is chutzpah. I don't know if you folks know what that word means, but he gives a very good description here in a short anecdote about what is chutzpah. It's a supreme self-confidence. It's a boldness. It's nerve. And sometimes it's an obnoxious aggressiveness. And he gives a little story to explain what that really means. The lady's name is Esther Swartz. She was in front of a hotel in Miami with her 3-year-old grandson, Jacob. She absolutely adores Jacob. She bought him a little canary yellow circular sun hat so the sun wouldn't touch the top of his dear head. She also bought him a pail and a shovel, and they headed out to the beach. And she's sitting there admiring Jacob's grace as he picks up a shovel of sand and dumps it in the bucket, picks up another shovelful and dumps it in the bucket. And she's saying, "Oh, Yahweh, thank you so much for Jacob." Well, just then a tremendous wave comes in, picks up little Jacob, pail and shovel, and washes him out to sea. Esther Swartz is very upset. She looks up at the sky and shouts, "Who do you think you are? Do you know who I am? I am Esther Swartz. My husband Solomon is a physician, and my son Billy is a dentist. How dare you do that?" Just then a second tremendous tidal wave washes the little Jacob, pail and shovel, right back to his grandmother's feet. Whereupon Esther Swartz looks up at the sky and shouts, "He had a canary yellow hat. Where's the hat?" That's chutzpah. And I think it would do us good to include a little bit of that in some of our own prayer life. Because when we understand the mercy and grace that has been bestowed upon us, in Hebrews it says, "Therefore let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in a time of need." Even going back to 1559, there's a quote from the Book of Common Prayer, and it reads very similarly. "Also that I may with free conscience and quiet heart, in all manner of temptations, afflictions, and necessities, and even at the very pangs of death, cry boldly and merrily unto thee and say, I believe in God the Father, Almighty, maker of heaven and earth." So When you come boldly in front of God and recognize that He's your friend and that you have the blood of Jesus covering you and you have the righteousness of Christ, you can speak boldly and you can make big requests because you're talking to the King. An example given here is that years ago, and I don't know if this is a true story or not, but it makes for a good tale. The professional golfer Arnie Palmer played a series of exhibition matches in Saudi Arabia. When he was finished, the king was so impressed with Palmer's expertise that he desired to give him a gift. Palmer, a multimillionaire in his own right, demurred. "It isn't really necessary. I just enjoyed meeting your people and playing in your country." The king indicated his extreme displeasure at not being able to give the golf pro a gift. Palmer wisely reconsidered and said, "Well, how about a golf club then? A golf club would be a wonderful memento of my visit here." The king was pleased. The following day, a messenger delivered to Palmer's hotel room the title to a golf club, 36 holes, trees, lakes, and buildings. The moral of the story, in the presence of the king, don't ask for small gifts. One other brief story. One day when Jesus was walking down the road in Galilee and the blind man Bartimaeus called out, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stops, turns, and asks him, "What do you want?" Without hesitation, the blind man says, "I want my sight." Jesus says, "Your faith has saved you," and his sight was restored immediately. However, then Mark notes that Bartimaeus did something. He dropped his cloak. For a blind man, the cloak represented security. As the blind in the first century Palestine were considered cursed by God, their families threw them out in the streets. Their only protection against the elements was their cloak. He dropped his cloak. He dropped all the security he had ever known to follow the one named Jesus. What is it that you want today, right now? What do you want? I encourage you to ask boldly and drop your security and proceed on faith. So, as I mentioned earlier, the list of things to pray for is lengthy. I suspect it's why we are told to pray without ceasing. Otherwise, we'll never get through the list. Understand that we have a really, really big God. Understand that He only wishes good for us. Not only are you free to ask big, He furiously desires that we do so. Someone you know once said, "You have not because you ask not." A quote I like says, "All things in moderation, including moderation." Think on that. So once in a while, I think we need to go out on a limb. We need to challenge ourselves. We need to challenge God. It's how you'll determine whether or not His promises are true. So in conclusion then, consider this. If Jesus were to ask you today, as He did Bartimaeus, "What do you want?" just how would you respond? I encourage you to meditate on it. And when you decide what it is you want, ask for it. And ask boldly, a little chutzpah. God is watching. He's waiting for you to ask. So that's just a couple of things that I've picked up along the way about prayer. And again, the book, The Prayer of Jabez, and The Furious Longing of God by Brendan Manning, I think are two small books. If it happens to snow in the next couple of days like they're forecasting, this is the type of book you can sit down in front of the fireplace and plow through in an afternoon, and it has given me a lot of pleasure. So that's all I got, folks.
Quite think I can top that, but when Pastor was asking people to volunteer, I don't really like speaking in front of people. So, and then I remember last week, Brad Netherton was kind of the same way, and he prayed, for the Lord to take away his anxiety and everything. And I went a different way. You might think it a little cowardly, but let me read this for you. It's from Exodus 4:10 through 14. Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "O Lord, please send somebody else to do it." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad to see you." So I was praying for an Aaron of my own, and I'm looking out there, and is there an Aaron in the house? It's pretty packed. It's hard to see, but is there Aaron? No? Chip? Anybody? Okay, well, sometimes when you pray, you don't really get what you want or expect, because the Lord knows what you need, and he wants me up here for some reason. So as I said before, I prayed for an Aaron. He didn't give it to me, so it's an unanswered prayer. But he doesn't do it because he's being mean. He does it because he has a plan for me, and I need to trust in him. Because some other people that are pretty good also didn't get their answered prayer. One is 2 Samuel 12:13 to 16. And this was right after, this is King David. And he saw Bathsheba on bathing in the pool on the roof. And he wanted her, so he sent her husband Uriah out in battle to the very front of the line. And then he ended up being killed. And then later on, David married Bathsheba. And that's where this picks up. He's going to get a word from Nathan the prophet. Then David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die, but because doing this, you have made the enemies of the Lord show utter contempt." And then he said, "The son born to you will die." After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child and Uriah's wife born to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted, went into his house, and spent the nights lying on the ground. The elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused, and he would not eat any food with them. So David's just fervently praying, just to save the life of his child. But as we know in the story, that the child ends up dying. But, David didn't hold it against the Lord. It was the Lord's plan. And the Lord continued to bless David, and, David loved the Lord himself. And let me see here. Oh, and here's another good one. From Mark 8:22-25. Oop, did I skip one here? Oh, Mark 14:36. That's the second one there. Okay, now this is right after the Last Supper, and tomorrow Jesus is going to go through a lot of stuff. Going to go through the crucifixion. So he's out with some of his disciples, and he goes up to the Gethsemane to pray. And he says, "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but you will." So even Jesus was praying because he knows what's coming. He doesn't want to have to go through it, but he will if that's the Father's will. And he was praying so hard, he was bleeding up there. So once again, his prayer wasn't really answered, but the Father had a plan for him. Yep. And here's one. And even though, it may seem that, when you're not getting your prayers answered, that, God's not caring about you, or he's not thinking about you, or he doesn't want to answer your prayer. But in Hebrews 13:5, it wasn't so petrified I could remember it, but it says, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." So even though you're praying, and your prayer isn't answered, the Lord is always with you. I think I'm missing one here. And then a lot of times you can't just, pray once, "Lord, blah, 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 blah." Go on. But you need to pray, more than once. And I know a lot of people have families that are in bondage to some kind of an addiction, and I don't think they prayed just once for them, and it didn't work, they just stopped. So how many people took maybe a week of praying for something to happen? Here's some. How about 30 years? Okay, we've got somebody who's been praying for 30 years, and you're still confident it's going to happen, right? It's going to happen, okay. And here's another, I found this one in our Bible study at church, which I never heard it until I read there, but I was kind of shocked about, sometimes you need to pray more than once for something to happen. So in Mark 8:22-25, they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. It's kind of a gross part. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus said, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't go into the village." But there's another example that, even Jesus took 2 tries to heal this man's blindness. And then like when Dave was saying, don't pray little, pray big. And then sometimes when you pray for something, you may get more than you actually asked for. An example of that is in 1 Kings 3:9-13. This is Solomon. Where's Solomon? Oh, there. Here's, "Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great number, a people too numerous to count or number, to give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. For who was able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon asked for this. So God said to him, Since you have asked for this and not long life or wealth, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both riches and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. So there's an example where the Lord's listening to what you're praying for and giving you even more. Oh, look at this. Here's another one of my unanswered selfish prayers. Here's my busted bracket from the NCAA tournament. And then another thing, just when you pray for somebody, it's showing the love of Jesus. I don't know if you ever listen to KTIS, and they have this prayer page where people can go on there and post a prayer need, and then people will pray for them. And if somebody prays for them, I guess they hit a button or something, and then it informs the person that they're being prayed for. And then they always call in, saying, I was so down that day, and then all of a sudden I got a text saying somebody's praying for me, and it made me so happy. And then also when my kids need prayer, they'll ask for prayer, and then I'll pray for them. And then they'll look up at me all happy, and it's just like, hey, yeah. It's almost like, even that, just showing them the love of Jesus is good, as well as getting the prayer answered for them. But that's all I have. I don't know if anybody wants to do a wrap-up. Pastor Blake. I think this is ending our prayer. I think we've got a guest speaker next week. Yeah, but I think Dave and I were the bottom of the barrel. So, yeah, the best for last, so. I think Lee already did it. Yeah, so I thought it was a special speaker, but yeah, I'm gonna get back to my ushering duties. Something that's really primary up here. So, okay, I'll close in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for giving us this opportunity to get together and learn from different people about how prayer affects their life, and also give us some insight on how we can do a better job praying to you. Please bless everybody that's here and keep them safe on their way home. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. They're cold.